Senator Scott Herndon to give us a legislative update.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
I've got like no notes there, so I'll just keep it open to make it look like I do. So, no, I have good access, so it turns out. But what I'd like to talk about is three areas. So Sine died at the Idaho Senate last Wednesday. So that was, almost a week ago now. And I'll tell you the three big areas that I think we made progress in this year. I'm going to talk about spending, I'm going to talk about protecting children, and there's a couple of different areas I'll go in that realm. I'm also going to talk about illegal immigration, so you know what's going on around the state. But before I get into all that, I want to talk about what it's like to be at the Idaho Capitol and how the business is run down at the Capitol. So there's a few law firms. Givens Pursley is one example. And that's just one example, and they have a lot of lawyers that wear green badges at the Idaho Capitol, so they are lobbyists for major corporations. They're there every single day on the garden level on the Senate side in what's called the vault. It used to be the safe where we actually probably kept gold and silver. Speaking of which, we tried to pass a gold and silver bill and the governor vetoed it, and we did not get a chance to override the veto because the Republicans, I was a co-sponsor on the bill with Phil Hart, and the Republicans in the Senate did not want to take a veto override vote. So we didn't even take a shot at it. Now, we likely would not have passed it in the House. That's how much animosity there is to real money in the state of Idaho right now. Gold and silver, if you look it up, is in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution as official coin of the United States. So I want to talk about Bayer. I'm going to start with Bayer. Bayer, you may know, I actually, back in the late 1980s, I went to Switzerland and Germany and I visited Bayer AG's headquarters. And they're a multinational pharmaceutical and agrochemical business. And they bought Monsanto in 2018 when Monsanto was the most hated corporation in America. Now, Monsanto was the most hated corporation in America because up until 1971, they made one of the prime ingredients in Agent Orange, the one that actually did a lot of damage to people. So they stopped manufacturing that in 1974, and then they came up with this great new product actually in 1974 called glyphosate, which is Roundup. How many people here use Roundup as a weed killer? Okay. Ben, do you use it in farming or anything like that? Yeah, so what you'll find out is in Idaho, the sugar beet industry exclusively uses Roundup Ready seeds on 170,000 acres. It's a significant export product. You make white sugar out of sugar beets. So in a lot of the agricultural parts of Idaho, they are highly dependent on Roundup because they only use Roundup Ready seed. Amalgamated Sugar Company is one of the major companies in Idaho. Now, Bayer is also a major employer in Idaho. In southeast Idaho, they employ 800 people, and they mine phosphorus that they use to manufacture Roundup. So they acquired Monsanto in 2018, and at that point, you had about 3 years' worth of lawsuits going against Monsanto for Roundup-related physical harm. People were claiming it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So they've been losing multi-billion-dollar jury awards since then. Now, in most cases, the judges will reduce the jury awards. So they're not actually losing that much money. But Bayer took a business risk in 2018, and they've been losing a little less than half of the cases, so they win half. So they hired some lobbyists this year. Roger Batt, a very likable lobbyist, and a couple of others, including sending a guy to the Capitol that works directly for Bayer's State Relations Department. And they wrote a bill that they also tried in Iowa and Missouri and Florida and Texas. Now, Missouri is one of the places they've lost some major Roundup lawsuits with big jury awards. So they wanted to use Idaho. Idaho has damage caps. You can't sue for billions or even hundreds of millions of dollars in Idaho. You won't get that award. And it turns out we don't have any major Roundup lawsuits in Idaho, but they thought Idaho would be an easy win. So in January, they donated maximum donations to Senate leadership and to House leadership. They gave $1,000 to Chuck Winder. They gave $1,000 to Mike Moyle. January 5th, they gave $500 to Mark Harris, who's the Republican caucus leader, the caucus chair in the Senate. And then Mark Harris carries their bill that would basically say that the label that the EPA approved that's on Roundup that fulfills their duty to warn under Idaho law. And so as long as you have a label on the product, you cannot sue them for damages if you believe it caused you harm later. So Bayer pays Senate leadership a donation, has them run their bill, and then lobbies really hard. Every day at the Capitol, they've got 5 people minimum working the senators to get us to vote for their bill. Now, why do they want a bill in Idaho? They want a bill in Idaho because if they pass a model bill in Idaho, if you read the Iowa bill, it's exactly the same. And they can say, look, we got the bill passed in Idaho, and so why don't we pass it here in Iowa? So the conservative Republicans, I did not like that idea. I was personally offended that a corporation would want to get insulation from lawsuits. I would recommend that you go toe-to-toe. The courtroom is the place to go toe-to-toe for any person in this room to go toe-to-toe with a major multinational corporation. And if you can make your case before a jury, then you win. And if you can't, then you lose and you walk away. But they wanted immunity from those lawsuits. The conservative Republicans teamed with the Democrats, all 7 Democrats in the Senate and 12 Republicans, all the way over on the right, the most conservative ones and the most liberal ones, joined together, and we defeated the Bayer Roundup bill on the floor by 2 votes.
Wow.
Good job.
So then, right, so 16 to 19, right? So if they get 2 more votes, it's 18 to 17, they win. So then what do? Most people would go home at that point. You just lost your bill and you can't come back and get another bite at the apple. So instead, they went across the rotunda and started another version in the House. And they made a slight change to it so that they could claim it was a different bill. And we told them over in the Senate that I had to work diligently to hold my 19 together. I got a guarantee from Ruckty that the Democrats were going to hold together. I kept all my people together. They were trying to pick off 2 weak members of our coalition. And when they understood that we were not going to cave in the Senate, they pulled the bill from the House Business Committee because they realized we could get it out of the House, but we're not going to get it out of the Senate this year. So then after that, they filed their 3rd attempt in the Senate. And they worked it all the way until last Wednesday.
Wow.
They were hoping they could cave 2 people. And Chris Trakel would walk around every day and I'd say, Chris, I just saw 5 of the Bayer lobbyists in your office. He said, yeah, but until they give me a red Corvette, I am a no on the Bayer. Anyway, that's the way it works down there. And you literally spend half your time trying to kill bad ideas that would be harmful to regular people in Idaho. While they're spending big money, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Bayer spends a lot of money against me in the race, right? All they got to do is get rid of 2 senators this cycle, and I guarantee they're going to be back next year with the same bill. That's what will happen. They're just biding their time, hoping they can wait us out. So that's basically how the Senate works, and you got to have all the right people in all the right places at just the right time. And we did the same thing with, we've tried for 3 years now, that as it turns out, there really is a problem in Idaho. We have a criminal law against any of us in the room giving sexually obscene materials to a minor. That's a crime in Idaho, unless you're a library or a school, or a parent. You can actually give it to your own child. So we have those 3 exceptions. So 3 years ago, they tried to just take the exceptions out of the criminal law, pass the House in Patty Ann Lodge. So now you're going to hear another story that the committee chairman in the legislature, one side or the other, have more power than a governor. Because they could say, look, I'm not going to hear the bill that passed with every Republican voting for it over in the House, gets over to the Senate, she says, I'm not going to hear it. And that's the end of the bill. Now, believe it or not, sometimes that works to my advantage. Because if I want a bill killed, that may be my only way to get it killed, because if it gets out of committee and gets to the House floor, then, and I'm in the Senate, of course, so let's say a bill snuck through my side, I could not kill it, gets over to the House, gets assigned to House State Affairs, Brent Crane's chairman of House State Affairs, and I would tell you years ago every bill should get a hearing, but sometimes that might be the only opportunity I have to keep a bill dead. Because if it gets out of that committee and gets to the floor, it's going to pass and the governor's going to sign it. The process is complex. So, but I was just going to tell you about this library bill. So 3 years ago, we just tried to remove the criminal exception, overwhelmingly passed the House, goes over to the Senate. Patty Ann Lodge says, no way, I'm not going to hear it. We're not criminalizing librarians. Okay, so the next year they come back, I think that was last year, we tried House Bill 314. You can, if harmful material is given to a minor, clear definition in Idaho code using the criminal code, you have a right to sue for harm caused to your child. Governor vetoes that bill. Veto override, it was a House bill, so it starts over in the House, so they took a vote. When it originally passed, I think it only had 42 votes. You need 47 to override. For political cover, some of those people who voted against it the first time in the House changed their vote. They ended up with 46 votes. You need 47 to override a veto. So they failed by 1 vote. Now, Mark Sauter was on the wrong side of both of those votes, as you probably know. Okay, so then, this year, we ended up with this, started out with House Bill 384, library bill, still pretty much like last year's 314, but it's got a couple things in it that the governor says, if you have this in it, then maybe I'll sign it. So they put that in 384. But the Senate leadership is a lot more moderate, and they're working with Jeff Schroeder. They're trying to give Jeff Schroeder, who is one of the most liberal Republicans, his voting record is worse than some of the Senate Democrats, but he's a Republican. And he's got a challenger this year. So they want to give Jeff Schroeder a win in this area. This is how politics works. They need to give Jeff Schroeder a win so that when he's running for re-election right now, he can say, I was the sponsor of what turned out to be Senate Bill 1289. So they hold the House version, 384. They start a new Senate Bill 1289, which I drew a diagram of. It's the hardest bill I've ever read. I read the whole thing. I mapped it out. I used Microsoft and I created a whole map in Excel. This step, this step, this step, this step, this step, this step, this step. 15 steps. And in the end, you're paying a whole bunch of money and there's no guarantee that you accomplished anything. You end up at a judge who says, no, it wasn't harmful to minors, and you're done. And so I didn't like the bill. At first, I wanted to vote for it. But I read it, I'm like, this is overly bureaucratically complex. I don't like it. So what did I do? I went over to the Democrats, who I know are going to be against the library bill, and I said, James Ruckty, who I get along with great, from Pocatello, a Democrat in the Senate, and I said, James, where are you guys on the library bill? He says, well, we're all voting against it. Okay, so that's 7, I'm thinking. All I got to do is get 11 more. This is a great story. So we get 1289 on the floor, and I get up. I can't believe I'm debating against the library bill, right? And I talk about how convoluted a process it is. And I'm doing okay, so then I sit down, and there's a pretty long debate because it's the library bill. So I got time, so I'm working the phones. And I'm checking every senator, and I'm like doing a count. I'm like, we don't have enough votes here today because Carrie Semmelroth, the Democrat, traded her vote with Jeff Schroeder so that she could get one of her bills passed. So basically, they told Carrie Semmelroth, the Democrat, if you will go ahead and vote for this library bill, we'll let one of your bills move forward. Vote trading. That happens in the Idaho Senate. So now I realize I thought I had 18. So I called James. Do I have all 7 of you guys? Yeah, you have all. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We lost Carrie. I'm like, we're going to lose. So I'm working the phones on the people I think I can win. And Doug Ricks, who sits right behind me, every time I'm on camera, you can see Doug Ricks right behind me, and he always realizes if I'm debating, he's got to quit picking his nose. And he's normally right behind me, but he's not there that day because he had a medical problem and he was out. And so instead of Senator Doug Ricks, I've got Senator Mrs. Ricks, his wife. And she doesn't know all the politics in the room. She's just listening to the debate. Nobody's talked to her. See, what happens is before you get to that day you're going to debate, people are vigorously working, figuring out their coalition. And if we have the votes, that's why sometimes you'll see us go on the floor and we'll vote on something without any debate. And it's this super controversial thing, and you're like, I'm going to give you a story. I'm going to finish with one other story. How much time do I have? Okay, so Doug Ricks is gone. And we debate, and I've added it up, and I'm on this chat, and I'm talking to senators on the phone, and I'm like, we only have 17, and there's 35 in the room. We're going to lose. And I'm like, that's too bad, because this bill was really a terrible bill. So we take the vote. I'm doing a count. I'm physically counting. You have to really listen, and I'm like, pretty sure we lost. And then Scott Bedke announces the count. The bill failed 17 to 18. Turns out that Mrs. Ricks, who had nobody to talk to her, the middle Republicans had forgotten to cover their base with Mrs. Ricks. So she just honestly listened to the debate and thought, this isn't a very good bill, and she voted no. And we won. I'm like, that's awesome. And they were so upset. They left the room. What's that?
How could a wife of an elected official vote?
Because she was his appointed senator. So when he's gone, he can appoint a qualified replacement, and she was a qualified replacement.
Oh my.
That's how.
That's scary.
So anyway, I'm like, thank you for the providence of God, right? Because if Doug was there that day, we would have lost. All right, and then they immediately said, I had said something about the AG's opinion, and Jaron Crane, who's actually a pretty good friend of mine over in the House, he was so mad at me because he felt like I killed his library bill, his compromised library bill. And they literally said, Scott lied, we need to move for reconsideration. And I didn't lie. I had said I had gone to the AG's office. Well, I had the day before. They just didn't know. In fact, I left his office the day before and went and got the AG's opinion. And so they were so mad they were going to blow the whole thing up until Raul Labrador told them, actually, no, Scott did come to our office. And they're like, oh. So that was the end of that bill. We waited. I told James Ruckdy in exchange, I said, look, James, I'm not going to push for any other library bill. I'm sick of library bills. Yeah, right. I will not work to get another library bill to the floor. But I said, but if one gets here, I'm probably going to vote for it if it's a decent one. So I gave him that warning. So I was fair, I was honest. And I did not work to get a library bill to the floor, but by the grace of God, we got a library bill, House Bill 710, to the floor the last week of session. And the last day of the session, the governor signed it into law. So we finally have a library bill. And by the grace of God, because Doug Rice was there, we actually have a decent Child Protection Act for libraries. Now, for everybody in your community, if they, and I only mean the Democrats in the community will say, it's a book ban, it's book burning, Salem witch trial, whatever. They'll say all that stuff. And the way I debated it on the Senate floor, we passed a bill that I actually helped draft. I met this great constitutional attorney, and we passed House Bill 498 this year, which is an online age verification filter for pornographers. Before Pornhub distributes porn, now in Idaho on July 1st, they will have to have a system that takes your state-issued ID, and they can't store the data from it, and they have to verify your age. And in Louisiana and Texas, that passed a similar bill, but ours is actually better. Ours is constitutionally bulletproof, because I literally had the best constitutional attorney that works appellate law and goes to the Supreme Court. He wrote the main portion of the bill, and it passed. And Pornhub in Louisiana and Texas, after theirs went into effect, Pornhub pulled out of the state. So I'm expecting any month, any week coming up here, we'll get an announcement that Pornhub will no longer distribute pornography in the state of Idaho online. And so that's now, what's interesting about that bill is the Democrats all voted for it. It passed unanimously in the House and the Senate. The governor signed it, and the governor claimed it as a big win for Idaho. And when I debated the library bill on the floor, I said it's no different than House Bill 498. All it is an age verification bill for obscene material at your government-owned, taxpayer-funded libraries. And it also applies to private libraries, but it applies to schools. But it's no different. And I said none of the Democrats in this room should vote against it. But they still voted against it. Okay, they're not being consistent in their logic. They obviously have made a mountain to die on that issue. Okay, now I want to talk about two other things, and I'll keep it relatively short. One is we totally, because I say no to bloated budgets, $22 billion we got from the federal government during the last 4 years. Before I got into office, over the 4 years before I was in office, Idaho grew its government spending from $9 billion even, 9.0, to $12.9 billion. That was ongoing spending. That's ongoing. In addition, they got $22 billion of COVID money. Of that $22 billion, $6 billion is federal debt. Every year, Idaho, in our balanced budget, we're spending $1.5 billion of national debt because 43% of what we spend is federal money. So, point being that we could say no, and we should say no if we really want to balance. You talk about a balanced budget at the federal level. What about a balanced budget at the state level? We have power over whether we go into national debt right here in the Idaho State Legislature. But because I was willing to, we would pick up about 9 to 12 votes last year, no's on budget bills. In the 4 years before I got in the Senate, actually in the 5 years, going all the way back to, maybe it was 4, 22, 21, 20, and 19, the Senate never killed a single budget bill. Hundreds of budget bills every year, hundreds of spending bills, your taxpayer money, national debt. They never killed a single one on the Senate floor. If they kill it, I'm going to give you an example here in a moment of what happens. But they never killed one. This year we killed 4 on the Senate floor. And the reason we did is because we were willing to vote no last year on bloated budgets, and we caused total budget transformation this year. We now break all the budgets into what we call the base and line items. If you remember Ronald Reagan, for those of you who are old enough, he said, I want the line item veto. I want to be able to strike out this line item because it's huge blow. There's tons of that stuff. There's a $17 million brand new summer EBT, electronic benefit card. It's a debit card for kids to eat. It's a brand new program, brand new government program. $17 million. And we actually killed it on the Senate floor, overwhelmingly, 10 to 25. Didn't even come close. JFAC sends it to the Senate floor. We kill it. What happens to the bill? The budget goes back to JFAC. JFAC rewrites it without the new $17 million program, sends it back to the Senate floor, and it passes. So we saved $17 million just doing that. And we had multiple wins like that, but I'll tell you about the last great fight in the Senate that ended on the last day we were in session, literally last Wednesday. So ITD, I voted for a budget that would spend $580 million on mainly local bridges and local roads. Because to me, that's actually, unless you want to argue that we want to have private road associations maintaining our roads, I think that's one good use of public money. I think I can justify that. We all benefit. So I voted for this, but in the bill was this great thing. ITD has a headquarters on State Street in Boise. It's 45 acres. And they wanted to, back in 2018, they were kind of negotiating with the city of Boise because Boise wanted to turn it into an urban renewal district, 45 acres right on the Boise River, and turn a $35 million property into $900 million of combined assessed value with mixed residential, commercial, and retail space. So they were negotiating with developers, and they really wanted to get rid of the state from that 45 acres, and we owned it. So in January 22, the HVAC system leaked and caused $6 million of damage to the main building there. So ITD moves out over to our new Chinden campus that we bought in 2018. And they're only supposed to be over there temporarily, but they're still using all their test buildings. They test asphalt and rebar and road fabric and different things like that. And the way state law works, that the legislature writes, is state law says that if they say we don't need the property anymore, then they declare it a surplus. The property transfers to a different department, so it transfers from ITD to the Department of Administration. The Department of Administration in state law says, we're going to tell every other state agency that this property is available. But it doesn't tell them how long to give them notice. So they gave every state agency 7 days notice.
Oh my goodness.
Okay? Hey, State Street property is available. I heard Parks and Rec was interested, but they got to figure out if they got the budget to do this. And 7 days goes by, and Department Admin says, hey, nobody said they're interested, so we declare it surplus property, and we're going to put it out to bid for sale. Boom, it's done. The state law says that. So they put it up for bid. 3 developers, one of them owns the Maverick gas station, so it's 3 really big developers. with their major real estate agent down there, TOK, puts a $52 million offer in because they're going to turn this into a $900 million property. This is sweet. So we go there the beginning of November for the JFAC tour, Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. I'm there, and I'm there with a lot of big spenders, okay, on JFAC. They vote yes on almost everything. They're rubber stampers. And everybody in the room is like, this seems like a really bad deal. Because to move over to the other campus, you want us to build $50 million of new buildings over there, $6 million of new furniture, $36 million to renovate the building over there, and you're only selling this property for $52 million, and then the Historical Society's got to move off into a $12 million, but this doesn't make any sense. And so we're like, obviously cool on the deal. And TOK, the realtors and the developers are actually in the room with us, and they're like, no, this is a great deal. And we've already signed the contract, and earnest money's already been transferred. And this is beginning of November. 2 months fast forward, we're in the new session, and we find out that guess what? The earnest money had not been paid, and then no contract had ever been signed. So in the budget committee, we're like, this makes no sense. We're going to write in the budget bill, the 580, we passed the major budget for ITD. Remember I told you we do a base budget? Now this is the line item budget that has all the bridges and the roads. Great leverage point, by the way. It's got all the bridges and the roads. And we write in there a little paragraph that says that the State Street campus sale is revoked. Has the full force and power of the Idaho government. It's as powerful as any other state law we can write. The sale is revoked. And that's in the ITD budget bill, one paragraph. And we send it to the floor of the House. And it passes by one vote, 35 to 34. One person was absent that day. Comes over to the Senate, and Chuck Winder, the pro tem of the Senate, says, this is not right. We have made a deal. Everybody's going to think that the state of Idaho backs out of its deal and they can't trust us. And we're like, Chuck, there was no deal. Okay, real estate. I'm not a real estate developer. But I'm pretty sure until the day it closes, you don't really have a deal, right? I mean, anything could happen. And there was no signed contract. So JFAC wrote this bill, and we're revoking the sale. And it also affected the Department of Administration budget. Separate bill, because there we're telling the Department of Administration in one paragraph, you are going to transfer the campus back to ITD. Okay, so Chuck says, this is the hill I'm dying over. So the last day, the day we're supposed to vote on, we hold it until the last day we're supposed to be voting on bills. And Chuck pulls it's House, I don't even remember which House bill it was. And he pulls a procedural move. No, I know what happened. We take the vote and we lose by 2 votes. Oh, this is really good. So we take the vote and we lose by 2 votes. 2 votes. And guess what? All the Democrats voted for it. And all the conservative Republicans who probably think the bill is too expensive voted for it. The Democrats voted against it. The most conservative people, I would probably normally vote against that budget, and instead I voted for it because of the principle of the sale. And I want legislative authority over that, not executive branch authority. Okay, so I'm like, I've got these 2 competing principles here, and I went for the one versus the other. But we lost. The middle Republicans won by 2 votes. So we send the bill goes back to JFAC. We can't leave without an ITD budget. So JFAC says, well, we've worked it every which way, and we're going to keep that paragraph in there. So we'll send the bill back to a new bill back to the floor, minus $100. $580 million minus $100. We send it back to the floor, and that's where Chuck said, oh, that's it, it's over. So he's working, trying to get his coalition together. And I'm working, trying to get our coalition. I mean, working. Like, are you on board with me today, Cornell? Are you on board with me today? Or do I have your vote? Can I count on you? That kind of working. And Chuck pulls a procedural maneuver. It's a Senate bill now. And he pulls a procedural maneuver, didn't tell any other Republican. Gets Mason's rules wrong, but gets the parliamentarian to rule that Mason's rules allows him to kill the bill. And then Kelly Anthony, the majority leader, so caught off guard that Kelly appeals the decision of Scott Bedke, the lieutenant governor. And so we have a debate, and we take a voice vote. Should have called for a roll call. Very clearly the ayes had it. The Senate was saying, we disagree with the Mason's rule and the ruling of the chair. The nays were very clearly softer, and Scott Bedke said, the nays have it. And there's nothing you can do at that point. It's dead. There's no more appeal. We had to ask for a roll call vote before we took the vote. Now it's too late. So we go back to JFAC. Literally, within the hour, I'm back in the JFAC room. And they're like, well, we're going to rewrite it. Minus another $100. So we did. We rewrote it, minus $100, sent it over to the House, not the Senate. Same bill. So now we're down $200. In the meantime, we go up to the Republican caucus room. If you ever watch the Senate, we gavel in, we take a roll, we immediately go at ease, and we disappear for 2.5 hours. We go up to the Senate caucus room, we have a come to Jesus talk with Chuck Winder. I mean a come to Jesus talk. And then, in the meantime, and this is the last day of the session, before we go home for a week to wait to see if the governor vetoes anything. And then the House passes the bill by 4 votes. So when we come back onto the floor at like 7:30 p.m., there's the bill waiting for us. And this is a funny part. So we had this huge, long come to Jesus talk upstairs, and we already had debated the bill. We come back down onto the floor. Open debate. There is no debate. We immediately take the vote. We win by 1 vote. And the governor vetoed 2 bills this year. He signed hundreds, and there's 2 bills that he did not sign, and they become law anyway. And it was the ITD budget and the Department of Administration budget. Because he said, I am not putting my name on that bill. But it's law now. So there you go. So anyway, it was a great session. I'm happy to take any questions if you're allowing time for questions. Otherwise, we can be done.
We can have time for questions. Any questions?
Yeah.
You also mentioned illegal immigration. I would be really interested to hear.
Yeah, okay, immigration, right. Because I didn't want to take too long. Immigration.
Go ahead.
So the dairies, thank you for asking. The dairies want illegal immigrants. The dairies, 70% of their employees, they told a House committee this year, are illegal immigrants. Now, I already knew that because I was there last year, remember? So remember when I ran, I knew that they wanted driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, and they want amnesty for illegal immigrants in Idaho. Why? Because remember I told you about the special interests. And a lot of our senators live in rural areas, agricultural areas in South and Southeast Idaho where there are very large dairies. And Bob Narabout is the Idaho Dairyman lead guy, and his son Rick is now kind of taken over. And Bob is a great guy. I really like him. We went to lunch last year, and he told me, Scott, look, we hire illegal immigrants, and like if they're driving to work and they get pulled over, they see the lights in their rear view mirror, they have to make a decision because if they get deported, like if they're here illegally, they might get deported, and then they're absent their job and their family. And so what do? And I don't want them to be in that situation. He said, like, Jesus, I want to, no, this is what he said. He's a believer, but I think he's stretching the scripture a little bit. And he said, look, well, these are the least of these, and we need to just let them stay and help make their life easier. So that's what he told me last year. I said, Bob, we're not going to, because he had a bill last year, Senate Bill 1081, to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. I said, Bob, we're not going to do that. You're not going to get that off the Senate floor. So he changed course last year, and he wrote Senate Joint Memorial 101 last year, which called for amnesty. It literally said, let's grant, not citizenship, but the right to be here. Not citizenship, but the right to be here for illegal immigrants who work for our dairies. And he told me the whole problem, I get it. But I said, Bob, that's a problem with the United States Congress. There's few things the Congress is supposed to do, but that's one of them. I'm not going to take away the thing they are supposed to do. Let's work on the 9,000 things they're not supposed to do. And so this year, they brought back a joint memorial that got rid of we killed the joint memorial last year over in the House. This is an example. I voted against it last year because it had amnesty. This is just a petition to Congress. So they gave up the driver's license bill last year. They sent it back to committee. They knew they didn't have the votes. They wrote an amnesty joint memorial. It passes the Senate. I voted against it. It goes to the House. And Brent Crane in Senate State Affairs says, we're not going to hear that. I don't have the votes to get it out of my committee. Because they actually have conservatives over in their committee. So then, this year they rewrote it. And it basically says we still need these illegal immigrants for our agriculture industry. They're essential workers. But this is not amnesty. That's what it said in the joint memorial. So to be fair, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna vote for Senate Joint Memorial 102 this year. I don't like it, And then Brent Crane still didn't hear it over in House State Affairs, but instead I co-sponsored House Joint Memorial 8, which basically said that the federal government, that Joe Biden needs to be impeached for the invasion at the southern border that he refuses to do anything about. And House Joint Memorial 8, so we started it over in the House, and it was a very strong, great anti-illegal immigration petition to Congress. And it turned into House Joint Memorial 11, and if you look it up, it died on the House floor by 1 vote. They wouldn't even say that there is an invasion at the southern border over in the House. Why? Because a bunch of them are from ag areas. And the House has gotten more liberal over the last 2 years. So we ran a bill over in the House to strip public welfare benefits from illegal immigrants in the state of Idaho. Not emergency medical services, just welfare. Welfare. And it died by 1 vote in the House Business Committee. Like, you gotta be kidding me. This is Idaho. So we did pass a bill. I sponsored a bill. It's on my website, House Bill 434. I don't even remember the numbers. And it said it authorized the governor of Idaho to enter into interstate compacts to build a wall on the southern border of the United States and install surveillance cameras and use the Idaho National Guard, militia, and Idaho State Police and anybody else he wants to send down there to do that. And it passed the House. It did. It passed the House. And then Senator Jim Guthrie, who ran the driver's license bill for the dairies, he's the chairman of Senate State Affairs, and that's where that memorial would go, House Joint Memorial 11, and he said, I'm not hearing that one. And that's how it goes down in the Idaho legislature. So know that illegal immigration is a real fight in Idaho because there are a lot of illegal immigrants in Idaho. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Yeah, who can we write to tell them?
There was a bill about election integrity, a committee or some kind of an organization that would review concerns of citizens' concerns of election integrity. Now, I've been doing deep research on these voting machines, and they are so vulnerable to all kinds of nefarious things, and I've got a whole list of them right here if you're interested, but I wondered what happened with that bill and if there's another resource where I can get cross-checked. I am not the smartest guy in the room, and I want somebody besides me to see this stuff.
Okay, so I know of a couple of election integrity bills. Usually, so I'm in the Idaho Freedom Caucus, a group of conservative legislators, and on the House side we have Joe Alfieri, and Joe Alfieri and Tina Lambert and I usually run our election bills. And one that Tina Lambert and I ran this year, last year we passed a bill implementing post-election audits, hand count post-election audits. And this year we passed another bill to give the Secretary of State and the State Controller and State Treasurer more time to certify the election so that the post-election audits can be completed before they certify an election. So they have to go do a certain percentage of precincts around the state, hand count the results, and then certify the total state results. So that bill passed this year. So we passed the first one last year for the audit, and then we passed the more time, and we also asked for more information from the counties on their canvass report.
Right,
So,
I saw that one.
so that bill passed. So that was good.
Right.
We ran a different bill to create a new office in the Secretary of State for election crimes.
Right.
That bill failed in the House in Idaho. And that was a very reasonable bill, that they would investigate allegations of fraud at the elections and that they would actually have a staff to go do that, and we couldn't get it passed in Idaho yet. We're going to try again. Now, we might have other bills that were election integrity related, but those are the two biggest ones. We've tried to get rid of, tried to tighten up absentee ballots, and I'm trying to get rid of the affidavits. I want everybody to have an ID. I will tell you that Babe Vote sued over our getting rid of student IDs last year as a form of voter ID verification. I carried House Bill 124 last year. It passed, governor signed it, and Babe Vote sued us, and the Idaho Supreme Court just ruled 5-0 that Babe Vote has no case. Of course the state can require that you have an ID to vote, and a state issued ID to vote, so we know you are who you say you are. But you can still show up and just swear that that's the person you are under penalty of perjury, and I don't think that's good enough. I think you should have an ID. You can't get on a plane and just swear you are who you are. So I think if you can't get on a plane without an ID, you shouldn't vote without an ID.
These voting machines should not be certified.
Understand? Okay, thanks.
What Boundary County just did,
What's that?
what Boundary County just did is they put in cement an absentee ballot drop box.
Uh-huh.
Now, by law, does that have to have a camera on it or not?
Does it have to have a what on it?
Camera.
I don't know. That's a good question.
It does have a camera on it.
It
Okay.
does? Well, we're gonna cite that.
Question for you. So
Yeah.
where does one go when since there was no office created, where does one go when they have allegations of election fraud?
Well, so theoretically, you're probably going to go, if I were to read state code on the subject, my guess is most of the authority is going to be at the local level in the prosecutor's office. That's typically where most prosecutorial authority is. There is some authority at the Attorney General's office, but all authority has to be done by the state legislature. So we had one bill this year, just to give you an example of that. We had a bill where, Ben, maybe you can ring your noggin for a moment and tell me, we have a bill that if a county official commits a crime and they're an elected official and in the course of their duties they commit a crime, you can actually have someone request the Attorney General's office to investigate that. However, if a city official does the same thing, a city elected official, you cannot request the Attorney General's office because in Idaho code, we do not make that provision. So your counties and your cities and your sheriff's departments only exercise the authority that the state legislature grants them. All authority is in this room, and you grant it to your representatives in the Idaho state legislature. And before a sheriff can do anything or a county commissioner can do anything, there has to be Idaho code to cover it. So that bill, believe it or not, you would think that's reasonable, and I supported that if the Attorney General can investigate county official corruption, that we should be able to investigate city elected official corruption, and that bill failed in the Senate on the floor.
By how much?
I was pretty close if I remember right. It was one of those ones where you're like, I can't believe we just lost that vote by like 2 votes. I'll have to look it up to remind myself. And so we would come back and try it again next year, is how things work. Sometimes it takes a few years.
Thank you.
And you beat them into submission. I had one bill passed this year. CPS now has to tell parents their constitutional rights. It took me 4 years to get that bill signed into law, finally. It passed the House twice, the Senate wouldn't hear it. Last year I couldn't get it out of Senate committee, and this year I got it all the way through and the governor signed it. And if I remember right, I think even the Democrats voted for it this year. And it's finally because I just beat them into submission, right? Because I'm a mean guy. No, you just work and you get people to understand this is a good idea. And that's how we did it. Okay.
Any other questions?
What do you mean by telling parents their constitutional rights on a CPS visit?
Yes. So every year, the number's been going down ever since I first started trying this. They used to do about 11,000. So every year, the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, all the states are the same because a lot of the Child Protective Services program run by the Department of Health and Welfare are mostly funded by federal money. And when you get federal money, you have to comply with federal requirements. So that's why all the states work the same way. All their CPS looks about the same. So in Idaho, every year they get about 22,000 calls about alleged child abuse, neglect, or abandonment.
Right.
Some of those might be completely legitimate. Of those 22,000 calls, and if it's really urgent, they're probably going to call law enforcement. But otherwise, they literally call the CPS, 211, the care line. And there's a call center, and they assign a certain number for investigation if they think that they should go check it out. So then a Department of Health and Welfare worker, caseworker, usually a young lady, typically, college educated, mid-20s young lady, will come. I mean, that's really common profile for a CPS worker because they're social workers. They'll come to your door. A lot of times they'll request law enforcement. Usually law enforcement isn't there to enforce anything. They're usually there to aid the CPS worker in case the CPS worker needs help. So they're not really technically there as the primary lead on this investigation. So the new law that will go into effect July 1st says that the 10,000 times a year, this year was actually just under 9,000, 9,000 families received a visit in person from a CPS worker. And on the first contact that CPS worker has with the families, they will now have to give them a written form that tells the families that they have a right to consult with an attorney at their own expense, that they do not have to answer questions of the CPS worker, that they do not have to allow the CPS worker to enter onto their premises or in their home, and that they do not have to allow the CPS worker to question any of their children, because that is your constitutional rights. Now, the way they can overcome that is the parent can agree. That's consent. Or if there's an exigent circumstance, law enforcement with probable cause and exigent circumstances can still enter the home without a warrant. Otherwise, they need to go get a warrant. And so that's what now every parent's going to learn in Idaho every time they have an interaction with the department.
The problem I have with that, yes, they need to know what their constitutional rights are. But I'm from experience. I took custody of my 4 grandkids from my daughter. If she'd been given a lot of those provisions, she would have just put them in the car and left. The kids are not protected. So
it's a careful balance. So the state has only a certain compelling interest. It's a balance between parental rights and protecting children. And the state has a legitimate interest in protecting children who are truly being abused. But what happened is the power swung too much to the state. And the Constitution never went away. And telling people their constitutional rights helps to keep an equilibrium of balance between the people and the state. And that's what it's about. So this protection has always been there. If a building inspector were to show up at your home today and want to enter your home, he needs consent or a warrant. And if he doesn't have a warrant, you can tell him to go pound sand, and he has to pound sand. And so that's always been the case. And so this is the way that the founders of our great union constructed the union, is they did not want the king just coming into their premises.
no, and I agree with that, but we're trying to protect our children.
Correct.
We need to know what's going on in that house.
Okay, so I'll give you one final answer. The Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals is probably the most liberal court circuit in the United States of America. The most liberal. If you want to protect children, let me tell you what the Ninth Circuit has said about protecting children. Are you ready? Some of the greatest harm to children is caused by child protective service workers. Some of the worst harm, worse than even some abuse they can receive at the hands of their parents, is taking a child from their parents. And they've had their experts at the Ninth Circuit write whole books about that subject. Storming the Castle to Save the Children is one of those books written by a Ninth Circuit court expert. And so when you want to protect children, you have to make sure that the 1,300 children in Idaho that are taken from their parents every year by CPS and put into foster care, which, by the way, they're using Airbnbs for foster care right now because they don't have enough places to put those people. And there is a tremendous amount of child trafficking and sexual abuse that happens in foster care. That's the balance that you have to find. And so as a state legislature, we've got to look at the whole picture. And so this is part of the whole picture. Okay. Anything else? You can tell I've studied the subject. It took me 4 years to get that bill through.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.